It's the morning of February 6th, 2009. The town of Corbett, Oregon sits east of Portland, the kind of place where farmland runs straight into thick forest and everybody more or less knows everybody. Two men are driving along a road that runs beside Gordon Creek when they notice a red pickup truck pulled off near a small bridge. At first glance, it looks abandoned. Then one of them sees something move past the guardrail, a hand. They stop the car and run toward the bridge. Down the slope leading to the creek bank, hidden in the wet grass, they find a woman bruised, soaked through, barely conscious, but alive. The first thing she says is, "Call the police. My husband and I were attacked." When paramedics arrive, they recognize her instantly. She's a local. Her name is Hazelyn Lynn Stomps, 56 years old. She's in obvious agony, drifting in and out, but she's lucid enough to start talking before she's even loaded into the ambulance. And what she describes next will dominate headlines across Oregon for the next 2 years. According to Lynn, she and her husband Jerry had driven out to this exact spot that morning to meet a stranger interested in buying their boat. The man had called himself Dave, found their listing online, and pushed hard to meet quickly. Jerry, cautious as always, didn't want to hand a stranger their home address, so he suggested meeting near the creek instead. Dave had mentioned he liked to fish. Jerry figured they could talk business and cast a line at the same time. Lynn says she waited in the truck while Jerry and Dave walked down toward the water together. A few minutes later, in the pouring rain, a second man she'd never seen before appeared near the truck. He had a gun. Jerry screamed at her to run. She didn't get far. The man caught her in the middle of the bridge and threw her over the railing. She struck a concrete support on the way down and blacked out. When she came to, she was alone. Jerry was gone. So were both men, and she couldn't stand. It took her nearly 2 hours to drag herself, inch by inch, back up toward the road with a fractured pelvis, cracked ribs, and a broken tailbone, hoping someone would drive by before she ran out of strength. At the hospital, doctors confirm the injuries are severe. Out in the woods, a full search operation launches almost immediately. Sheriff's deputies, search dogs, volunteers combing the tree line along the creek. But days of heavy rain have turned the ground to mud, and nobody can find a single useful track. No footprints from a struggle. No tire marks from a second vehicle pulling in or out. Nothing. For those first several days, investigators treat the case exactly the way it presents itself, as a kidnapping, possibly tied to a robbery that spiraled out of control. Search coordinators bring in more volunteers. Deputies walk grid patterns through the trees along the creek, checking culverts, checking the water itself, checking every structure within walking distance of that bridge. Local news picks up the story fast. A well-known Corbett couple, a violent ambush, a missing husband and grandfather somewhere out in the wilderness. For a community this size, it's the kind of story that touches almost everyone. But almost immediately, the story starts to develop cracks. And the deeper detectives dig, the less it looks like Jerry Stomps was ever kidnapped at all. Who was Jerry Stomps? Gerald Irvin Jerry Stomps grew up in Oregon and enlisted in the Army right out of high school, serving a tour in Vietnam before being honorably discharged in 1973. He and Lynn had met when they were young, and the two of them stayed connected through letters the entire time he was overseas. When he came home, they got married and put down roots in Corbett, a rural stretch where steady, long-term work was hard to come by. Over nearly 4 decades together, Jerry and Lynn made a living however the land and the season allowed. Landscaping, growing and selling Christmas trees, managing rental properties, raising livestock on a second piece of land they kept across the river in Klickitat, Washington. Jerry was an outdoorsman down to his bones, always hunting, always fishing, and by every account from the people who knew him, never without his favorite revolver. Friends and family would later tell police that gun went with him everywhere, to the store, to church. Nowhere Jerry went without it. He and Lynn raised 2 sons, and by 2009 they had grandchildren of their own. Jerry was 60, Lynn was 56. After 39 years of marriage, they were exactly the kind of couple easing toward retirement after a lifetime of hard, physical work, Nothing about their life on paper suggested anything was wrong. Neighbors described Jerry as blunt and outspoken. The type of man who said exactly what was on his mind, whether people wanted to hear it or not. That bluntness had made him a few enemies over the years. Minor disputes and disagreements, the ordinary friction of small-town life. But nothing that anyone who knew him took seriously enough to explain what was about to happen. To his sons, his grandchildren, and the people who'd known the Stomps family for decades, Jerry and Lynn were simply fixtures of the community, a couple who had weathered nearly 40 years together and come out the other side. That picture would not survive the investigation that followed. Detectives began retracing Jerry's movements in the days leading up to the kidnapping, expecting to confirm Lynn's timeline. Instead, almost nothing lines up. Lynn told police Jerry had spent time at their property in Klickitat, Washington, in the days before he vanished, which meant crossing the bridge over the Columbia River to get there. When investigators pull surveillance footage from that crossing, Jerry's truck never appears on it, not once. What the footage does show is something else entirely. Lynn, driving that same truck herself, alone, on multiple occasions in the days before the supposed kidnapping. Friends and relatives tell police the last time anyone can actually confirm seeing or speaking with Jerry alive is January 30th, 2009, nearly a full week before the incident at the bridge. Then there's the boat. Lynn said Jerry had listed it online, and that an eager buyer calling himself Dave had reached out almost immediately. But when detectives pull records for the account tied to that listing, they find nothing. No messages from any buyer, no calls. No trace of a man named Dave existing anywhere in Jerry and Lynn's digital life. And then a man renting a portion of the Stomps property comes forward with something that, at the time, hadn't seemed worth mentioning. In the days before Jerry was reported missing, he'd noticed smoke rising from a burn area on the land. Nothing dramatic, just smoke, on a rural property where burning debris was a normal part of life. Except now, it doesn't feel normal at all. What the search warrant turned up, with Lynn's account falling apart piece by piece, detectives obtain a warrant to search the Stomps' home. What they find inside reshapes the entire direction of the investigation. Some rooms are in obvious disarray. Others have clearly been scrubbed down recently and thoroughly. The kitchen stands out the most. Chairs have been stacked up on the table. Cleaning supplies are still sitting out. Near the sink, there's a small pile of empty soda cans and energy drink bottles, as if whoever cleaned this room had pulled an exhausting, sleepless shift to get it done. Outside, detectives find several burn piles scattered across the property, nothing unusual on its own, for land like this. But in one of them, they find fragments that don't look like burned wood. They look like bone. In a metal trash container nearby, there's a pile of ash containing what appears to be part of a human spine. Inside the house, they also recover something that stops several relatives cold when they hear about it later. Jerry's revolver. The one he supposedly never went anywhere without, not even that morning, according to Lynn, when he walked down to a riverbank to meet a total stranger. Inside the cylinder are 2 spent shell casings. Relatives insist Jerry would never have left fired casings sitting in that gun. It simply wasn't like him. The revolver is sent to the crime lab, and forensic testing turns up Jerry's blood, on the barrel and inside the weapon itself. A blood spatter expert will later testify in court that the pattern is consistent with a shot fired at close range, most likely to the head. The bone fragments from the burn pile go for DNA testing. Investigators already have a theory about what the results will show. They're right. The remains belong to Jerry. Based on the evidence, detectives now believe he was killed somewhere around 5 to 6 days before Lynn ever called for help at that bridge, long before any confrontation with a mysterious buyer named Dave could ever have happened. A story that doesn't match the injuries. There's one more detail that doesn't hold up, and it comes from an unexpected source, the trauma surgeon who treated Lynn after she was found. Lynn had described being caught in the middle of the bridge, near one of its highest points, and thrown over the railing before slamming into a concrete support on the way down to the creek. But according to the doctor who examined her, the injuries to her pelvis don't match a fall from that height. They're far more consistent with a fall from somewhere much lower. To detectives, that single medical detail lines up with a very different version of the morning at the bridge one, where nobody threw Lynn Stomps off anything at all. A grieving witness. As the investigation grinds on for months, one more tragedy adds a dark footnote to an already disturbing case. The tenant who'd told police about the smoke coming from the burn piles, a key witness prosecutors were planning to call at trial, takes his own life at his Corbett residence before the case ever reaches a courtroom. It's a somber reminder of just how far the fallout from Jerry's death rippled outward, well beyond his own family. A theory takes shape. Piece by piece, investigators build a picture that looks nothing like the one Lynn gave them on the side of the road. They believe Jerry was killed at the property days earlier, shot with his own revolver, then dismembered and burned over the following days in an effort to destroy the evidence. During that same window, surveillance cameras around town repeatedly catch Lynn driving Jerry's truck alone, stopping at some of his usual haunts, seemingly trying to create the impression that he was still alive and simply away for a few days. Then, on the morning of February 6th, detectives believe Lynn drove the truck out to Gordon Creek Bridge, a well-known local fishing spot, intending to leave it there and report Jerry missing, hoping investigators would eventually conclude he'd wandered off, fallen into the creek, or met with some kind of outdoor accident. But something went wrong. Investigators believe that while she was down near the water, Lynn slipped on the wet embankment and fell, breaking her pelvis in the process, leaving her stranded in serious pain, with no way to walk out and no way to explain why she was alone at a remote bridge with her husband nowhere in sight. So, according to the theory prosecutors would eventually present, she improvised, lying injured on the ground for close to 2 hours before she was finally spotted. She built the story about the boat sale, the buyer named Dave, and 2 armed strangers, using the one piece of truth she actually had, that they really had been trying to sell a boat, as the foundation for a story elaborate enough to explain everything else. A motive nobody can fully pin down. As for why prosecutors never land on one single, tidy answer, and they say so openly in court, what they do establish is that Lynn was carrying a significant amount of debt that she had kept hidden, at a time when Jerry, a man who, by every account, refused to use credit cards and hated owing anyone anything, apparently had no idea. Investigators also learn that friends had heard Jerry talking, in the period before his death, about the possibility of divorce. Prosecutors argue that financial pressure and the fear of Jerry eventually discovering the truth about her debt was the most likely driving force behind what happened. But even they acknowledge they can't point to one clean, singular breaking point, only a pattern of secrecy that appears to have been building for a long time before that morning at the bridge. One investigator would later put it simply: Lynn was manipulative enough to try steering an entire homicide investigation down a road that never existed in the first place. The trial. Nearly 2 years pass before Lynn Stomps stands trial, in January 2011. By then, she's approaching 60, and at points during the proceedings, she's wheeled into court. Prosecutors spend weeks laying out the physical evidence, piece by piece the surveillance footage, placing her alone in Jerry's truck, the blood found on his own revolver, the bone fragments recovered from the burn piles, the trauma surgeon's testimony about her injuries, the empty inbox where a buyer named Dave should have left some kind of trace. The lead detective on the case takes the stand and tells the jury, in plain terms, that he believes Lynn shot her husband twice, including once to the head, at close range. Her defense no longer leans on the original kidnapping story. That version doesn't survive contact with the evidence. Instead, her attorneys shift the argument entirely, suggesting that if she did kill Jerry, it may have happened during a heated domestic confrontation rather than as a calculated, premeditated plan. It's a fallback argument, an attempt to give the jury a version of events that doesn't require them to believe Lynn spent days coldly dismembering and burning her husband's body while telling neighbors he was simply away. The jury doesn't see it that way. Lynn Stomps is convicted of murdering her husband. At sentencing, Her family finally gets the chance to speak to her directly. One of her sons tells her, in open court, that she took someone he loved deeply and stole him away through an act so violent and evil he can barely find the words for it. He tells her he hopes that, for the rest of her life behind bars, she thinks about the pain she caused everyone who loved Jerry. She's sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, meaning, at minimum, she won't be eligible until she's in her 80s. In the years since, Lynn has continued to maintain her innocence. She remains incarcerated at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Wilsonville, Oregon. Jerry, a Vietnam veteran who served his country, spent decades working the land with his own hands, and reportedly never went anywhere without the very gun that would ultimately end his life, was laid to rest with full military honors, more than 2 years after the morning he disappeared. For nearly 2 hours, Hazelyn Stomps lay in the wet grass beside that creek, injured and alone, constructing a story detailed enough to launch a manhunt, dominate local news for weeks, and hold up under scrutiny for the better part of 2 years before it finally gave way, thread by thread. It's a case that leaves behind a question that has nothing to do with boats, or bridges, or burn piles, and everything to do with the people closest to us. How well do we actually know the person we've spent almost 40 years of our life beside?